Hi, my name is Sonia Hawkins. Through my personal experience, I've become aware of the possible effects of baby reflexes on learning. In this segment, Move Ahead Today interviews two experts in this field.
Now, why is it that our senses are not integrated? One of the reasons could be at birth. Something could have happened at birth. But the biggest thing is our reflexes. Or our reflex. What is a reflex? It's a movement you do without thinking. We need our primitive reflexes to be able to be born. So if the doctor turns the baby's head, the whole body will turn. And later that reflex must be inhibited. At first, when the baby looks at something, he moves the whole body. And then later, he'll move the head. And then later, he'll just move the eyes. But if that is not integrated or inhibited, he moves his head from side to side when he's reading, and then he never crosses his visual midline. And that has an influence on the way he reads.
A reflex develops already in utero before you are born, because you already need your reflexes to be born, and you need it for quite some time after you're born to survive. So it has more than one function. It's to help you to survive in the utero. It helps with the birth of the baby, and it helps in the surviving of the baby immediately after he's born. Because a reflex is a stereotype movement, so you don't think about it. It's the same movement over and over until you've done it enough time for the body to say, okay, stop now, it's enough. You can go and sleep now, we don't need you now, and the brain can take over in its development. The Moro reflex develop already 9 weeks in utero. If you put a warm cup of water on the tummy, or these sounds, or the baby is moving on that, because it can already hear the vibrations, can feel the vibrations. So already the baby have this movement where when the sound or the noise or a temperature change is coming up, it will throw open, immediately have this staring of eyes, and then normally start with a cry. And what is mums doing? They pick them up, fold them up, close the Moro reflex and say, it's okay, and actually inhibit it for them at that moment, the reflex, so that they can be safe and continue in movement. And it's so important to have it, because a baby cannot talk, so that's the way of them to say, hey, there's something wrong, I'm not safe, come and help me. Also remember, we have more than one type of reflexes. We have our primitive reflexes, which I'm talking about, which is already there in utero, and almost by 6 months it should be inhibited. But then we have posterior reflexes, because the aim of a baby is to get up, standing up straight against gravity and walk on 2 legs. That become our posterior reflexes. And some of them will take much longer to inhibit it. So normally primitive reflexes by six months, and some of our posterior reflexes can even take up until 3 years. But by 18 months, most reflexes should be inhibited then. Inhibited means it needs to disappear. It needs to go and rest. It does not disappear in the brain, the function, the cortical in the back brain, where you find the reflexes. It stays there, but it's asleep. If I can say inhibited, sleeping, it's not functioning anymore. Because if a reflex is still active, it will prevent a lot of other cortical functions. So we need a reflex to inhibit, so that you can be able to live, to learn. Okay, I'm going to explain this with an example. If you take the example, the 18R, or the asymmetric tonic neck reflex, is one that you needed to be born with. It helps in the birth process, but it's also very important when a mother is breastfeeding a baby. So what happens when the baby is turning his head to the side, the one hand and knee will come up and the other one will go out immediately. So if you think of the baby, the hand goes round the mother. The other one is coming up holding. the knee is lifting up, so it's a perfect position for breastfeed. Otherwise, how would the baby stay in that position to keep breastfeeding? But if you're in grade 2 and you need to hold a pencil, start writing, and you turn your head, the hand will come up, the knee will come up, and the other hand will open, because that's what the baby is doing. You cannot hold the pencil, you cannot cross the midline. It becomes impossible to write, to read. But for breastfeeding, it's fantastic. That's exactly what you need. The moment the 18R is inhibited, you find the baby, the mum will hold it, and any noise, they throw away their arms, turn their head like that to see. So you have to bring them back, but then they're older and but this time they knew, I'm hungry and I want to feed and this is my way. But not when you're born. So that's a fantastic security blanket which you have to automatically know how to feed. A parent won't normally see the reflex still active because that's natural movement for us. You can maybe say, this child is just a bit clumsy, or he fall over his own feet, or while he's eating, it's very messy. I know I always say he eats through osmosis, it's all over, but not. That's typical, a product of a reflex that's not inhibited. Or they throw a ball and when they catch it, it falls, and but the hands are here. It's all kind of symptoms of uninhibited reflex. Or as an adult struggling to drive, talking about the 18R for one, if you look to the back of the car to see what's going on, your hand wants to go up, your knees want to come up. So driving become, as an adult, a very difficult thing to learn. And not only that, you was naming the mora reflex, which we had named already. If a mora reflex is not inhibited, you get a feeling of panic. Children will be like panicky, and they will be emotionally, and people will put a tag on them, this is an emotional child. But it could be only that the reflex is not inhibited. So they are afraid of a lot of things. That's on a physical level, but also on an emotional level, but on a physical level. They can be prone to allergies. Because if you are constantly in a stressed position, you're more vulnerable to illnesses. So the mora reflex, which we notice more and more in society, not only in children, but also in adults, and you get this feeling of fear, feeling of I'm not good enough, failure, don't step into things. And if you think of allergies, how much more illnesses we have in that. It's a growing syndrome of people that have hay fever, etc., etc., ear infections. And that's a whole new topic. So if the mora reflex is not inhibited and you have constant ear infections due to a close connection between the two, you also have later math problems. Self-concept. So the one is leading on to another subject, and in the end it's such a huge thing, and nobody thinks, maybe if the mora reflexes were inhibited, what would have happened with this child? The mora reflex is very close connected to low blood sugar as well, hypoglycemia. Because of the fear feeling, there goes the ups and downs. So they also have a craving for sweetness. So that's one of the things, if you notice. So a lot of people are tagged with ADD. It's actually a mora reflex that's not inhibited. And immediately we don't say that all ADD is connected to moro, but there's a great correlation between the two that needs investigation. So typically, if we say a parent brings a child for an assessment, we will assess various aspects of his life, like reading, maths, social behavior, emotional behavior, but we also assess reflexes. So we will go through the pattern of which reflex is inhibited and which is not. So you will start with the uninhibited reflex and repeat the movements until it's enough. So, or if I go one step back, if we say a reflex is a stereotype movement that needs to be repeated, to inhibit a reflex, you have to redo the reflex for that person until it's enough. And each individual is unique, because we are unique, and how many repetitions of movements I need. So each of us would be different in the process of inhibiting our reflexes. And some children maybe need more time to inhibit it. So a weak reflex for me is, I don't know if there's really strong or weak reflexes, but some children will actively and with force inhibit reflexes, and some not. So that will either take much longer, or another thing, the critical period of development will pass. What I mean with that, we are so unique, is that there's a limited time for us to do things. Take crawling. You have a certain amount of time when you start to crawl. If you don't do that, you either just stand up and walk, which a lot of children do, and they miss the process of crawling. And the same will happen with reflexes. So if you call it then a weak reflex, if the child doesn't do it enough, the critical period steps in, and it's like, okay, it's time now for your next development, and the body will just continue, and then you have an uninhibited reflex. Well, Paul Dennison say movement is the door to learning. So if you haven't got movement, you can't enter through the door to learn. And if you look at even a newborn baby, after the first 2 weeks, they start to move. If you think of a baby in utero, it's not like lying still all the time. They're actively involved in movement. They're actively involved in the birth. And just something about cesarean, when you go through the birth canal, you act very actively involved in getting this process done. And that's already part of doing these reflexes. So if you are born by cesarean, you don't have enough of this movement, and you need maybe a bit longer afterwards to do this movement and reflexes, or at least create the opportunity for children to move. So if children doesn't move, they can't learn. So in the society of today, we have a safety net around us. We want our children to be safe. So we put them in chairs, we put them in rocking chairs. We inhibited their movements, their natural movements. Instead of a few years ago, or a decade or two ago, baby was put on the floor and a free choice of movement to develop. And the moment you give that to a baby, it's grasping it. They move constantly, kicking, moving the eyes, wriggling the head. In any movement, they do constant movement. So that's how learning process. I always say, if a baby lifts up his head, that was the first reading lesson, because the eyes start to focus. So learning started very early with movement. There was a boy, he had reading problems. So he was coming for extra reading. The mum and the dad were divorced, staying in 2 different towns. This specific boy wake up in the night, walking on the highway, about 60 kilometers to his dad. So the morning when the mum wake up, the son was gone. So they brought him back, and we was working with him every week, with no improvement on an emotional level, no improvement on his scholastic work. Instead, it was actually going down. And one day we started doing reflexes. And we done the automatic gait reflex. Just to explain what an automatic gait reflex is, when a baby is born and you hold him and the feet touches the floor, he will automatically lift it up. So it looks like they're climbing stairs or they're dancing. And that was the specific reflex that came up. And we've done it once. While we were in this, he started to cry immensely. I couldn't believe the boy that walked out of that room. Reading problems disappeared immediately. The relationship with mom and dad improved immediately. It was like really a child coming in and a new person getting out of the room. It was, for me, an amazing experience. And to realize it was a simple movement we've done. He was grade 1 when it started, and it happened when he was 7, and it happened on 9. Okay. So the connection between it must be a load of emotional release that happened on that day. But on a cognitive level, the moment, if you can put your foot down and keep it, you don't want to draw back, you become stable. You can start thinking. Left, right can start integrate. Top and bottom in the brain, which is our emotional experiences for that integration, could start developed. So that's what happened there on a neurocortical level. But the emotional impact was so huge, and it flowed over into his reading, spelling, maths, everything. And I saw him a year later with no problems at all. I've got another example to give to you. It's like I have a boy, starting with me about when he was 9, year 3, or grade 3, turning at well, that was in an Afrikaans, so the k and the t was always, it's not lekker, but letter. You know, the k becomes a t, and the t becomes the k. So it doesn't matter how he's talking, he will reverse the two, and also writing like that. So he was coming to me, and I'm doing a balance with all my clients, a balance. A balance is where you take 7 dimensions of the brain, like your left and right, your top and bottom, back and front, motivation, your stress levels, your ability to keep your attention. We take all that kind of functions that's in the brain, and we do a balance where we equalize them all so that they can work optimal together as a unit and not little pieces. So we was doing every day or every week in his session a balance. And then we do a reflex was coming up where we have to work on the plantar and the palmar reflex. It's where a baby, when you touch his palm, he will close and hang on it. It's also a grasping, holding, reflex. They also sometimes hold their own hands. You can see one of their own fingers will go in and they will grasp their own hands. But the effect on scholastic level is communication and articulation and speech. And we was working sometimes, we've done a few reflexes, we've done a few other things every time in a balance. He also sometimes holds his own hands. The moment his fingers touching his hands, he will close it by himself, open it reflexively and close it up. And we was working on that. And in the session, he changed back to using the letters correctly. A T becomes a K and a K becomes a T. It was immediately. It's about 2 years of working with him, doing balances. And the school was surprised. The teacher was so surprised that because they've given up on him. Because if you talk wrongly, you will spell incorrectly. It is just a hindering and a blockage and everything on your development. So that's one thing. Another one could be what we talk about, the doll's eye. And the doll's eye is where the eyes are doing the movement and then the head is moving. So if there's a noise just opposite me, I will just move my eyes to look there. It's not a movement and then my eyes will jump. But you can think, for reading, your eyes need to be moved through the midline, freely and without stopping in between. And I had once a client, actually it was his brother, giving feedback to the parents, and his brother was sitting on the dad's lap. And while I was talking, I noticed his eye movements was jumpy. And when I commented on it to the parents, he said, I have spent so much money already on an optometrist to correct the eye movements, and you are telling me, just by looking at my child, that this is the problem. And be corrected through a balance again and through therapy, and with no problems in that anymore. No glasses, no exercises. As a mother, as I have 3 children of my own, all grown up now, one of our main purposes in life is sort of to keep our hands underneath them and providing them all the needs, what they need to grow up, so that we can take away our hands, that they can stand up on their own and live a fulfilling adult life. And for me to do a balance and do integration is exactly where you put your hands underneath them and give them the best feeding to have the best roots ever in life. That's what I would have wanted to know, because as a young mother I didn't have this knowledge. I only receive it as my children grow up and I was learning and studying. So for me that would be the best fertilizer, to let my children grow up with more security, more love, more self-image that would have blossomed if I have known that when my children were young.
It's so important to know if your children's reflexes are inhibited, and you must really take it to heart and go to a kinesiologist, an educational kinesiologist or practitioner, that she can work through all these things and give you a brain gym to get your child integrated and the reflexes inhibited.